website is census.gov. Thanks so much to both of you for being here. Alexa Jones Putoff is with the U.S. Census Bureau, where she's the chief of the Population Estimates Branch. We were also joined by Pew Research Center senior writer Devera Cohn. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time as well. That website is pewresearch.org. We now go to the floor of the House of Representatives. Have a good day.
Chaplain Father Conroy.
Let us pray. God our Father, we give you thanks for giving us another day. Bless the members of the People's House as they gather at the end of another week in the Capitol. Endow each with the graces needed to attend to the issues of the day with wisdom, that the results of their efforts might benefit the citizens of our nation and the world. On this Flag Day, may we be reminded of the greatness of the democratic experiment that is the Republic of the United States, and diligent in our responsibilities as citizens to guarantee the freedoms enumerated in the Constitution for all who claim this country as their home. We also ask your blessing leading into this weekend upon fathers throughout the country. May they be their best selves, and may their children appreciate fully the blessing their fathers have been to them. May all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentlelady from California, Ms. Matsui.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute, provides to extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, last Monday I attended a briefing by the American Enterprise Institute concerning foreign policy issues. I particularly appreciated a presentation by Dr. Fred Kagan, an internationally recognized authority on terrorist threats to American families. He provided a map which I believe should be known by the American people of the Al-Qaeda and associated movement areas of operation in safe havens. It is said Somalia is ruled by warlords, Libya is controlled by militias, and in Mali, there are new reports of terrorist training with surface-to-air missiles. This war began with safe havens in Afghanistan on September 11, 2001. I believe we should be proactive, working with our allies to stop terrorists overseas. We cannot wish the threat away because, in fact, threats are growing. We should support peace through strength by stopping terrorism overseas or face more attacks on the streets of America. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of access to higher education. Satine Tajnizi is a freshman at the University of Utah with aspirations of becoming a heart surgeon. As a first-generation American, Satine grew up watching both of her parents struggle to provide for her, working multiple jobs while going to school, continually reminding Satine that America is the land of opportunity. Recently, I had the privilege of sitting down with Satine and several other college students to talk about their experiences paying for college and why it is critical that Congress come together to solve the current student loan debate. As a high school student, Satine enrolled in several AP classes and graduated near the top of her class. She was accepted at her first college choice out of state. However, due to finances, Satine opted to stay in-state for school, hoping her family would have enough money to pay for medical school later on. But with interest rates on subsidized student loans set to double July 1st, the chances that Satine's family can afford medical school are getting smaller. We have 16 days to reach a compromise on this matter here in Congress to help ensure that all Americans have the opportunities to reach their educational dreams.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today the House will be voting on the National Defense Authorization Act, known as the NDAA. The NDAA's purpose is to ensure that our brave sons and daughters who serve this country will have what they need to be trained and resourced to do their job effectively and safely. This authorization is one of the few policy matters in Washington not viewed through a partisan lens. As the father of a son and daughter-in-law currently serving our country in Afghanistan, I'm proud to say that that is the case. Today's NDAA includes an amendment I added that would mandate the Department of Defense implement a preliminary mental health assessment before individuals join the military. The goal is to assure mental health resiliency for those who will be facing the combat realities of war. The suicide rate among our militaries is unacceptable, and this amendment will help reduce it. The Department of Defense has done medical assessments for many years. It's time we bring mental health parity to parity in preliminary assessments. We must focus on the overall well-being of the force, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and advise my view.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today as a member of the Safe Climate Caucus to highlight the four-part plan released last Monday by the International Energy Agency about the importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It is yet one more report sounding the alarm that we are not on track to meet the agreed-upon target of limiting the rise of average global temperatures to 2 degrees Celsius. Mr. Speaker, how many more reports must be released before we act? Every day that Congress continues down this self-destructive path of ignoring climate change is a missed opportunity to bring immense benefits to our country. By failing to enact responsible climate change policies, we're missing the opportunity to simultaneously create good-paying jobs, protect our environment, and leave a sustainable planet for future generations. The time to act is now. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
I seek unanimous.
Does the gentleman seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute? Without objection.
Okay.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, there's a lot going on in our country right now, but we here in Congress need to remember that the #1 priority remains getting our economy back on track. That's why today I reintroduced the original Jobs Act. My Jobs Act would reduce the corporate tax rate and capital gains tax to 0. It would totally eliminate them. It would also extend for 3 years bonus depreciation and would allow 100% expensing for business assets. Finally, the Jobs Act would permanently repeal the estate and gift taxes, the death taxes. My bill would give businesses the boost that they need to create more jobs. It would stimulate our economy and would bring manufacturing jobs back to America. I urge my colleagues to support my Jobs Act, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize the many dedicated firefighters, first responders, and military personnel who are battling the ongoing Black Forest fire to save countless homes and lives in my congressional district. I would also like to recognize the coordinated response of all the federal, state, and local resources that have come together to contain the fire. Since erupting Tuesday afternoon, the Black Forest fire has at this time claimed 2 lives, destroyed 379 homes, and displaced over 41,000 people, making it the most destructive fire in Colorado history. I will continue to do all I can to help the thousands of families displaced by this fire and ensure that our brave firefighters and first responders have all the federal resources they need. I ask all of you to keep the people of the Black Forest and the family of the 2 who have died in your thoughts and prayers during this tragedy.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I ask permission to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, 20 years ago, Albania was struggling to leave behind its years of repression and dependence and deprivation, a period when it was a North Korea clone. Now, Albania is a democracy with elected representatives who engage in open debates with a vigorous civil society. Albania is a member of NATO that continues to contribute troops to the International Security Force in Afghanistan and participated in the U.S.-led liberation of Iraq. And it now aspires to have membership in the European Union. In contrast to the atheist dictatorship it left behind, Albanian churches and mosques are full. Similarly, Marxist economics has been replaced with an expanding market economy. America needs to be especially grateful to the government of Albania and to the Albanian Prime Minister, Sali Berisha, who has been a steadfast and courageous ally of the United States. Recently, when the U.S. needed countries willing to provide asylum to members of the MEK, now stranded in Iraq, Prime Minister Berisha agreed to accept 210 members of that group, far more than any other country. That was a sign of good faith and friendship for America. It will not soon be forgotten, and it took real courage on the part of President Berisha to make this general offer. We will not forget his friendship.
Pursuant to House Resolution 260 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 1960. Will the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holmgren, kindly resume the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of the bill H.R. 1960, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2014 for military activities of the Department of Defense and for military construction, to prescribe military personnel strengths for such fiscal year and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose Thursday, June 13, 2013, the seventh set of an en bloc amendments offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. McKeon, had been disposed of. The Chair understands that amendment number 18 will not be offered. Pursuant to the order of the House of June 13, 2013, it is now in order to consider amendment number 19, printed in Part B of House Report 113-108. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 19, printed in Part B of House Report number 113-108, offered by Mrs. Walorski of Indiana.
Pursuant to House Resolution 260, the gentlewoman from Indiana, Mrs. Walorski, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In May, the President declared a renewed intention to transfer detainees from Guantanamo, quote, to the greatest extent possible, end quote. He also announced he was lifting his self-imposed suspension on the transfers of detainees to Yemen. This, I believe, is a dangerous policy. It's dangerous for our troops fighting overseas. It's dangerous for citizens living in the homeland. The amendment I'm offering prohibits the Department of Defense from transferring Gitmo detainees to Yemen for 1 year. In other words, this amendment simply puts into the law the President's previous judgment that transfers to Yemen should be suspended. Those listening to the debate today might be asking, why is this prohibition needed? For starters, the Defense Department should not transfer detainees to Yemen because they represent some of the most dangerous terrorists known in the world. It's important to note that these individuals are still in Gitmo because even the Obama administration believes they're being legally held. The Bush administration didn't feel comfortable transferring these terrorists, and after Yemen was the starting point for the foiled airline bombing over Detroit, the Obama administration correctly decided not to transfer these terrorists back to that troubled nation. These individuals pose a real threat to the United States. Detainees at Gitmo pose a real threat to our national security. Transfers to Yemen should be prohibited because Yemen has become a hotbed for terrorist activity. In fact, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which is widely believed to be the most lethal of all al-Qaeda affiliates, is based in Yemen. Director of National Intelligence James Clapper testified in 2011 that AQAP remains the affiliate most likely to conduct a transnational attack. This is an organization for which we are at war, an organization that is resolute on killing as many Americans as they can if we don't stop them first. It makes no sense to send terrorists to a country where there is an active al-Qaeda network that we know has been engaged in targeting the U.S. The Christmas Day Detroit bombing attempt, the ink cartridge bomb plot, and the radicalization of the Fort Hood shooter all can be traced back to Yemen. So let's look at the facts. We should not be in the business of sending Gitmo detainees to Yemen because, number one, they represent some of the most dangerous terrorists in the world. Number two, Yemen is home of the most active al-Qaeda affiliate. And lastly, because Yemen has a poor track record of securing its prisons. A Yemeni citizen, the convicted mastermind of the USS Cole bombing, who took the lives of 17 American sailors, was being held by Yemeni authorities when he escaped from prison in 2003. Luckily, he was recaptured, but he was able to escape again from Yemeni custody in 2006 along with 22 other terrorists. Why risk another jailbreak by people who intend to do us harm? This is a common-sense amendment with the purpose of protecting Americans. My amendment does not say the President can't transfer detainees elsewhere. My amendment is only in effect for 1 year to give Yemen time to demonstrate that it can safely and securely handle Gitmo transfers. Before taking additional steps, I also believe it's prudent that Congress receive the Department of Defense's report on factors that contribute to re-engagement so that informed choices about future transfers can be made. This report is mandated by law and is currently overdue. In closing, I want to share a statistic from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. In 2012, ODNI reported that the combined suspected and confirmed re-engagement rate of former Gitmo detainees has risen to an alarming 27.9%. When I speak with constituents, moms and dads at home, they ask me how safe are we really. This rate of engagement comes to my mind. I ask my colleagues to consider the national security implications of transferring detainees to Yemen and join me in support of my amendment. Mr. Chair, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from Indiana reserves the balance of her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
To claim the time in opposition.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield myself 2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
The 56 inmates that we're talking about at Guantanamo are not the most dangerous terrorists in the world. In fact, the intel community, the Department of Defense, all determined that they were acceptable risks for release back to Yemen, back to their home country. Not everybody that we rounded up and took to Guantanamo, unfortunately, turned out to be the very, very dangerous terrorists that we thought they were. And the problem we confront is, with these 56 that we've determined are not a grave threat to the country, determining that if there's any minimal threat whatsoever, we're simply going to hold them forever is, well, quite frankly, un-American. That is contrary to our values to say that we're going to hold somebody indefinitely, I gather forever, because we think there might possibly be some risk. That's not the way the Constitution is supposed to work. More than anything, this amendment restricts the President's flexibility. If the President determines that this is safe, if the intelligence community determines this is safe, if the Defense Department determines this is safe, they ought to have that option. This amendment takes that option away and once again makes Gitmo the classic Hotel California. You can check in any time you want, but you can never leave. We cannot warehouse people forever. We need to give the President options, not restrict them. There are certification requirements that will always be in place to make sure that the Secretary of Defense, before releasing these people, certifies that he believes it is an acceptable risk. We will have to have that. But I think an absolute prohibition ties the hands of the President in an unhelpful way. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield 1 minute of my time to the honorable gentleman from Arkansas.
Gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 1 minute.
From Indiana for her effort on this very important amendment. For 4+ years, the Obama administration has declined to transfer these terrorists at Guantanamo to Yemen, and I would suggest that nothing has changed if you look at the facts of the matter. Yemen remains a partner in our war on terror, but it still has weak capabilities. It still has not yet demonstrated the ability to house such terrorists or to deter terrorist activity in its own quarters, as we've seen from things like the underwear bombing plot or the Fort Hood massacre. If we transfer these terrorists to Yemen, we cannot know for sure that it will not mean more attacks on our soldiers in Afghanistan, our ambassadors at our embassies around the world, citizens around the world or here in the United States or allied countries. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this temporary and restrained amendment to ensure that terrorists at Guantanamo Bay do not escape back onto the battlefronts of the war on terror. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Indiana's time has expired. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you. I thank my friend for yielding. There is more agreement here than meets the eye. I think everyone in this chamber agrees that no person who is a dangerous threat to the people of the United States should be released. I think most people in this chamber agree that if the government of Yemen is unprepared to effectuate adequate security means, then no person should be released to Yemen. The question here is who gets to make that decision. In this instance, the people who know the most about this, leaders of our intelligence community, of our military, of our law enforcement community, have reviewed the specific details of 56 cases. And they have concluded, based upon their review of those details, that the right thing to do is to release these detainees to Yemen if and when they are satisfied that Yemen's security measures are appropriate. So the question here really comes down to whether this judgment should be made by the members of this body who have varying degrees of knowledge about this issue, including the gentlelady who's very diligently learned a lot about this issue and cares a lot about it, or whether the decision should be made by people whom we have entrusted with the defense of our country, who have developed specific, granular, factual expertise about this question. I believe this is a case where the proper decision belongs with those experts. The proper decision belongs with those who know the most about this matter. Rigidly limiting the options of those experts is a mistake. And so although I believe we share the same intentions here, we don't share the same view of this amendment. I believe that this decision should be made by those best positioned to make it. If and when they determine that security conditions in Yemen are appropriate, then the decision to release should be made. In my view, that's the right process. I urge a no vote on this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself the balance of my time just to say I completely agree with the arguments from the gentleman of New Jersey. It's not a question of whether or not these people should be released. It's a question of who should make that decision. Should Congress make that decision? Restrict the President, restrict the intelligence community, restrict the Department of Defense. And as the gentleman from Arkansas pointed out, Yemen has been a very capable and helpful partner in the war against al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. I believe these decisions are best left to the experts, not to have Congress restrict them and limit their options. And with that, I urge opposition to the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Indiana. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purposes does the gentleman seek recognition?
Ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Indiana will be postponed. Pursuant to the order of the House of June 13, 2013, it is now in order to consider Amendment Number 20, printed in Part B of House Report 113-108. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
To offer the amendment.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 20, printed in Part B of House Report Number 113-108, offered by Mr. Smith of Washington.
Pursuant to House Resolution 260, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Smith, and a member opposed will each control 10 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself 3 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. This is a very straightforward amendment that simply asks the President to put together a plan to close Guantanamo Bay. One of the complaints in recent weeks is we've seen Guantanamo become more and more untenable. It continues to be an international eyesore. Way back in 2007, President George W. Bush said it should be closed. Then candidate John McCain said it should be closed. As recently as last week, Senator McCain and some other senators went down and reached that conclusion as well. I think a justifiable criticism of that has come from the other side of the aisle that said, well, you can't close it unless you've got a plan for what to do with the inmates and a plan for how to close it. And that is exactly what this amendment does. It requires the President within 60 days to come up with a plan for closing Guantanamo Bay Prison, and then it also removes all of the restrictions that are in this bill that would stop him from generating that plan. And the bottom line is we do not need Guantanamo. Guantanamo was set up in the first place in the hopes that because it wasn't actually on American soil, we could somehow hold people outside the normal bounds of due process in the Constitution. But the court ruled otherwise. The court ruled that habeas does apply because Guantanamo is effectively under control of the United States. So there's no benefit there. There's no greater rights in the U.S. than there are in Guantanamo. We just continue to have this prison that has been set up in a way that the international community cannot stand. And it makes a problem for us in terms of being able to cooperate with our allies and to have our ability to get that cooperation to properly prosecute the war on terror. So I am simply asking that we put a plan in place so that we can close Guantanamo Bay once and for all, something that Republicans and Democrats alike have said that they wanted to do. We simply haven't taken the steps necessary. The prison is becoming very, very expensive. There's $250 million in MILCON contained in this bill just to keep it at a somewhat temporary status. And beyond that, the prospect of the United States simply warehousing 166 people forever with no end in sight is contrary, again, I think, to our values and to our process. And I really want to emphasize the fact that we have here in the United States well over 300 terrorists incarcerated. There is a notion that somehow we couldn't possibly accommodate them here because of the threat, but we have Ramzi Youssef. We have the Blind Sheikh. We have some of the most notorious terrorists in the world housed here already, safely and securely. That is simply not an argument against doing this. The temporary facilities down at Guantanamo are not sustainable. Now, I'm not going to rush this and say we got to close it tomorrow if we don't have a plan. I'm simply requiring the President to come up with that plan and then giving him the legislative freedom to develop that plan. Because what we've done in this bill far too often is restricted that. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Washington reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 10 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to my friend and colleague, the chairman of the Sea Power Subcommittee on the Armed Services Committee, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Forbes.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, on May 28, 2010, I stood on this floor and made a motion that effectively stopped some of the worst terrorists in the world in Guantanamo Bay from being transferred to the soil in the United States. At that particular point in time, the then chairman of the Armed Services Committee, Democrat Ike Skelton, stood on the floor and said this: "We're in a position to accept this motion. I just wish to point out that there's no difference between the Democrats and Republicans when it comes to fighting terrorism." Today, we step on a course with this amendment to change that, as the highest-ranking Democrat on the Armed Services Committee seeks to overturn essentially that motion. And, Mr. Chairman, if the gentleman was asking that these terrorists be brought to his district, that would be one thing, but he knows that's very unlikely. And what you're having with this motion is very generously saying they could be brought to any of our districts. And we're hearing a uniform chorus stand up from North Carolina, Virginia, Guam, every other place saying, don't bring them to my district. And the reason is they know two things. They know the moment they touch U.S. soil, they will receive additional constitutional rights that no one in this room can argue what they are exactly. And secondly, that they have placed a target on every elementary school, every shopping mall, every small business in that district by other terrorists. That's why, Mr. Chairman, it's important that we come together, unified, and send a message to the President. We might not be able to stop every terrorist from coming to U.S. soil, but we can stop these terrorists by defeating this amendment. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman from Virginia yields back. The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the Smith-Moran-Nadler amendment, which provides a six-part plan for closing Gitmo. The amendment will remove the existing limitations on transfers, strike the current request for construction at Gitmo, and end funding for the facility on December 31st, 2014. The time to close Guantanamo is now. It is a stain on our national honor. We are holding 166 people at Gitmo, 86 of whom have been cleared for release. That is to say, they have been found guilty of nothing and judged not to pose any danger. There is no reason and no right for us to hold them further. Now, Mr. Speaker, I wonder which of our colleagues doesn't believe in the American system of justice. I wonder which one of us does not trust our own American courts. I wonder who among us does not believe in the Bill of Rights. Who does not believe in the right to counsel or that people should be presumed innocent until proven guilty? And what we have in Gitmo is a system that is an affront to those beliefs and to America. In the last decade, we have begun to let go of our freedoms bit by bit, with each new executive order, each new court decision, and yes, each new act of Congress. We have begun giving away our rights to privacy, our right to our day in court when the government harms us, and with this legislation, we are continuing down the path of destroying the right to be free from imprisonment without due process of law. I want to commend the gentleman from Washington and the gentleman from Virginia for fighting to close the detention facility at Guantanamo. The language in this bill without our amendment prohibits moving any detainees into the United States and guarantees that we will continue holding people indefinitely, people who are not necessarily terrorists, who we only suspect to be terrorists, who have not had a day in court to prove that they are or are not terrorists. We will continue holding them indefinitely without charge, contrary to every tradition this country stands for, contrary to due process and civil rights, because of this momentous challenge to the founding principles of the United States, that no person may be deprived of liberty without due process of law, and certainly not indefinitely without due process of law. We must close the detention facility at Gitmo now in order to restore our national honor. They will have no additional constitutional rights. The Supreme Court ruled that they have the same constitutional rights in Guantanamo as they do here. We must close this facility, restore our national honor, support this amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Washington reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to my friend and colleague, the gentleman from Ohio, Dr. Wenstrup.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the Guantanamo Bay detention facility was established to hold unlawful enemy combatants captured during the War on Terror. And any proposal to close the Guantanamo detention facility must first clearly address the transfer of remaining prisoners detained there. Many of the remaining detainees are the most hardened terrorists, including those responsible for the 9/11 mass murders of many Americans. There are three primary options: transfer to another country, or transfer to the United States, or stay put. Transferring these terrorists to another country comes with a substantial risk of re-engaging as an American threat. The current re-engagement rate of former Guantanamo detainees is nearly 28%. I served for 1 year in Iraq with the Army as a medical officer at one of the largest detention facilities there. Often, after prison release deals made by entrusted decision makers, we saw the same people return for new offenses. Additionally, there were multiple escapes and attempted escapes, as well as attacks trying to free the detainees. I've been to Guantanamo, and the facility there offers a safe and secure location away from our soldiers on the battlefield. I don't think there are many people in Cuba that are trying to free the people that are held at Guantanamo, and this was not the case in Iraq, and it may not be the case should they be transferred to the United States. I believe the prisoners at Guantanamo Bay are being treated appropriately in a way that we can be proud of as a nation. The hunger strike policy is carried out humanely, with the detainees treated as patients. The access to caregivers and medical facilities is the same for our troops as it is for those detained. Additionally, transfers to the United States would be very expensive. We've already built a courtroom there that cost us in the millions of dollars. These terrorist detainees pose a very real danger to our security in America. They mean us real harm. The President has the ability to certify transfers of detainees to other countries, but he has yet to do so. And until the President leads with a better solution, I firmly believe that keeping Guantanamo open is our best option, our safest option, and our most logical option. With that, I yield
Gentleman's
back.
time has expired. The gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank my friend for yielding. First, let me say I think we all agree that our service members who served us at Guantanamo have done a tremendous job and have brought great honor to our country. We thank and respect all of them. I also believe that there is unanimity here that if someone is a credible threat to the United States, they should be detained, tried, and brought to justice. The question is where to do that. Why should it be Guantanamo? Do defendants have greater rights if they are transferred from Guantanamo to a place in the United States? The Supreme Court has said no, they don't. So there's no tactical advantage in a trial. Are they more likely to escape if they're transferred to the United States? The history says no. The number of escapes from maximum prisons, the supermax prisons in the United States has been 0. Is it less expensive to hold them at Guantanamo? Most is certainly not. The average cost of incarcerating someone in a federal maximum security supermax prison is $34,000 a year. The cost to the taxpayer of incarcerating someone at Guantanamo is over $1.6 million a year. Is there some strategic advantage globally to holding these detainees at Guantanamo? The opposite is true. General Petraeus, Admiral Mullen, other leaders of our intelligence and military forces have said that Guantanamo is the best recruiting device against the United States around the world for those who are trying to sell the lie that the United States is an inhumane and unjust place. There is simply no rationale for an indefinite extension of the problem at Guantanamo. For reasons of security, for reasons of law, for reasons of cost, for reasons of strategic advantage, we should close Guantanamo Bay. That's why I support the Smith Amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Washington reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to my friend and colleague, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Cotton.
Gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 1 minute.
I oppose this amendment. I oppose the closure of Guantanamo and the transfer of detainees to the United States. Guantanamo is a state-of-the-art detention facility in which we've invested millions of dollars, in which our troops handle themselves with utmost professionalism. The detainees there have access to military tribunals and habeas corpus proceedings here in Washington, D.C. Who are these detainees? They're not innocent goat herders swept up by marauding United States military, of which I was a part, in which I detained numerous potential terrorists. They are people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, Mohammed al-Qahtani, one of the would-be participants in 9/11, terrorists who are closely associated with Osama bin Laden, who have received explosives trainings, who are recruiters, who are poison experts, who are suicide bombers, or who are commanders of al-Qaeda training camps. I do not think we should bring them to the United States, give them their Miranda warnings, give them attorney at taxpayer-provided expense, and if acquitted and not accepted by their home countries, be released back onto the streets of the United States. If that is what the advocates of this amendment would like, I suggest they should write their amendment in a fashion that would bring these detainees to their own congressional districts.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Moran.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you know, you can pretty much win any battle you want to fight with superior military might. But for wars of consequence, you have to be fighting from the high ground consistently. And that's what this amendment is all about. We will win this war against violent extremism, but in order to do so, we have to win over the hearts and the minds of hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world who want what we have
They want equal justice under the law. They want fairness and truth and transparency and democracy. The vast majority are young, idealistic, very impressionable, and unfortunately too many of them are misled and manipulated. We have a superior set of values and principles. It's what defines us as a nation. But we have to hold steadfast to those values and principles. We have to show that even when we are challenged, even when it's politically difficult, we believe in equal justice under the law. We believe that people are innocent until proven guilty. We believe that every life matters. We believe in human rights. We don't believe in torture. But we do believe in our justice system. It's not our justice system that's operational at Guantanamo. It was set up there to be outside our justice system so that we could detain people indefinitely. Can I have another 30 seconds?
Yield the gentleman an additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized for additional 30 seconds.
And at this time in our history, when we're furloughing 650,000 Department of Defense employees, how can we justify spending $1.5 million per detainee at Guantanamo when half of them have been cleared for release? Doesn't make sense. And now in this bill, we're authorizing another $250 million to be spent at Guantanamo. Those are misguided priorities. It costs $34,000 to jail very dangerous terrorists in this country. But in this country, we can convict them. We can punish
Gentleman's
them.
time has expired.
That's what we ought to be doing.
Gentleman
Thank
from
you,
Washington reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield at this time 1 minute to my friend and colleague, the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo.
Gentleman from Kansas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few facts I think are appropriate to bring to this debate. I oppose this amendment vigorously. Just 2 weeks ago, I was down at Guantanamo Bay as a trip as part of the House Select Committee on Intelligence. I will tell you that the soldiers and Marines and airmen of Joint Task Force Gitmo are taking tremendous care of our facility, our assets, and the detainees. Those who suggest that this facility should go away will create a problem that is worse than the one that we have today. This amendment is simply a pattern of appeasement that does not comport with the fact that radical Islamic terrorists will not cease to attack us simply because we wish that they will go away. So a few more facts. We close Guantanamo Bay. We try to release them to countries that will accept them, and we know that at least a quarter of them will return to the battlefield. We could bring them back to the United States and they go to civilian courts, and undoubtedly some of them will end up walking the streets of the United States. And perhaps the final fact, and one that I've heard said in support of this amendment, is if we simply close this facility, that recruiting for radical extremists will diminish. This seems illogical. There is no support for such a statement. They will continue to attack us whether we keep this open or closed. This facility is legal, it is just, and it is an important national asset. I yield
Gentleman's
back.
time has expired. Gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized and has 30 seconds remaining.
I yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
A whole bunch of false arguments are being laid out here. As has been clear, no greater constitutional rights come to people in the U.S. than in Guantanamo. So that is just a phony argument. Second phony argument is that somehow they can't be held safely. I have a federal prison in my district. I have an INS detention facility in my district. And frankly, if there was a Supermax facility in my district, I would not have a problem with them coming to that district. They should be held. I would hope that all of our Supermax facilities, which are holding very, very dangerous people, they'd better be holding them securely right now. It's $1.5 million a year versus $34,000. It is an absolute recruitment tool for al-Qaeda. Our military leaders, General Petraeus, have all said that this is something that is harmful to U.S.
Gentleman's
security.
time has expired. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to my friend and colleague, the Vice Chairman of the House Committee, gentleman from Texas, Mr. Thornberry.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, cost is a red herring argument here. Does it cost more to keep a detainee in Guantanamo than a federal prisoner here? Probably. But nothing like the figures that have been repeatedly cited on the other side. For example, if you look back at the fiscal year 11 Department of Justice budget request for moving the detainees to the U.S. It ends up on the first year being about $1.9 million per detainee and about $500,000 per detainee in recurring costs. On the other side of it, even the President, in a speech at National Defense University, says that it's less than $1 million per prisoner now on detainee. Is there a difference? Sure. Is it anything like we've been hearing? No. And the rest of the story is, under the Geneva Convention, if you're holding somebody under the laws of war, you cannot put them with federal prisoners, even in a supermax prison. They have to be segregated. So those costs of bringing them here are higher. But that's not really the issue here. The issue is, what is the best thing to do to secure the country and to deal with the terrorist threat? And I just remind everybody, the ban on closing Guantanamo is not permanent. We have to reapprove it every year. So if the President actually comes up with a real plan, not just a speech, but a real plan to close Guantanamo and then deal with the detainees, then that ban can go away. But you can't say, okay, we're going to remove all the restrictions and we're going to close Guantanamo and then we're going to figure out what we do with these people. And that's exactly what this amendment does. The gentleman from Washington says it's just asked for a plan. Well, no, the underlying bill just asked for a plan. His amendment, in addition to ask for a plan, it removes all the existing restrictions, and on page 4, subsection D says specifically, no funds shall be used there to detain people after December 31st, 2014. We got to get the plan first before it closes, and I think this amendment should be rejected.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from California is recognized.
How much time do I have remaining?
Gentleman from California has 2 1/4 minutes remaining.
I yield myself the balance of time, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman is recognized.
I strongly oppose this amendment. 2.5 years ago, I sent the President a letter about these important issues. I said in that letter, and I quote, "I fully recognize the importance of crafting a careful and comprehensive framework for the detention of terrorists who wish to harm the United States. I also recognize the challenges and legal complexities related to such an endeavor. This appreciation is why this issue is simply too important for the administration to address on its own," end quote. The President did not take up my offer at that time. Nearly a year later, in another unanswered letter, I wrote, "While I remain open to working together, I'm very disappointed that the administration has frequently shown a greater willingness to engage with the international institutions, foreign governments, and the media on issues relating to our national security than it has with the U.S. House of Representatives." Those are excerpts from 2 of the 5 letters that I've written to the President on this issue, which he has not answered. Yet he still has not come forward with a proposal of oversight or any plan. What to do with Guantanamo is secondary to the President coming forward with a comprehensive plan. Such a plan must include what he proposes to do with those terrorist detainees who are too dangerous to release but cannot be tried. Number 2, how he will ensure terrorists transferred overseas do not return to the fight. 3, what he will do with the terrorists we capture in the future. Specifically, how will he prioritize intelligence questioning? And finally, what he will do with the high-value terrorists still held in Afghanistan. This is a particularly critical priority for me. There are several extremely dangerous individuals still in custody in Afghanistan. The only option that I see as completely unacceptable for those detainees is to allow their release. We've already seen the outcome of making this tragic mistake in Iraq. While I appreciate the proposed efficiency of my friend and colleague, Ranking Member Smith's amendment, we cannot strike all prohibitions on transfers of Gitmo detainees, agree to bring them to the United States, release them overseas, and end all funding for Gitmo with absolutely no confidence that any of this will be handled in a way that best protects our national security. Lastly, and this is important, I want to say that I'm proud of the men and women in uniform who serve our nation every day at Guantanamo. It's not an easy duty. We owe them a debt of gratitude for their critical service to this nation. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the Chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. For what purposes does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Sorry, request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington will be postponed. Pursuant to the order of the House of June 13, 2013, it is now in order to consider Amendment Number 14, printed in Part B of House Report 113-108. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 14, printed in Part B of House Report Number 113-108, offered by Mr. Polis of Colorado.
Pursuant to House Resolution 260, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a very simple amendment. We, through our chaplaincy corps, need to support and do support various faith and philosophical beliefs among the men and women who bravely serve our country. We already support some non-theistic beliefs. For instance, we have Buddhist chaplains. Buddhism is a non-theistic faith tradition. And what my amendment would simply do is allow chaplains who are certified or ordained as secular humanists and ethical culturists or atheists to also be able to support the brave men and women who serve in our military. Roughly 23% of the men and women in our armed forces either have no religion or are atheists, but there are no chaplains that currently are able to represent this important and growing demographic. Under current law, the armed forces only allow chaplains who are granted an endorsement by an approved religious organization and have received a graduate degree in theological or religious studies, precluding many of the seminaries and other institutions that can provide certification to non-religious chaplains that could provide much-needed services to, particularly to the roughly quarter of our service members who have stated that they have no religious beliefs or are atheists. There's no reason why the only faith tradition and philosophical tradition in our military without chaplains does not have any kind of support to address their health concerns. Now, I've heard some say that, well, all members of our military, even those who are non-observers, are able to see psychiatrists or counselors for support. But that's a very different needs than the spiritual needs and the philosophical needs that people have. First of all, when someone sees a psychiatrist or counselor, it has a certain stigma that can be attached to it that doesn't exist when you're seeing a chaplain. It also doesn't enjoy the same confidentiality that a chaplain visit does, and the information discussed with a therapist can actually have an impact on the chain of command in terms of negatively impacting the service member's future military career. So again, the groundwork has already been laid with regard to non-theistic faiths like Buddhism, where we have active chaplains in our military. Many universities already have secular humanist chaplaincies, including American University here in Washington, D.C. Other militaries have this as well. Our allied militaries in Belgium and the Netherlands have humanist chaplaincies. And again, it's a very simple concept, and I think something that is long overdue to ensure that all members of the military, regardless of their faith background, whether they're believers or not, whatever their philosophy is in life, they have access to the chaplaincy to support their spiritual needs. And of course, non-believers have spiritual needs just as believers do. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim the time in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
This time, Mr. Chairman, I yield 3 minutes to my friend and colleague, the gentleman from Louisiana, Dr. Fleming.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the chairman for the opportunity to speak on this important issue. Mr. Speaker, let's examine what a chaplain really is. A chaplain is a person who is a minister of the faith, someone who ministers on the basis of a belief in a deity, a higher power, who is associated with or attached to a secular organization. An example, right here in this house, each morning begins each legislative day begins with a prayer from our chaplain. Back home, the hospital that I'm associated with, Minden Medical Center, my good friend, a Baptist pastor, is chaplain of our hospital. And so this goes to the core of the discussion. A chaplain is a person who is a man or woman of the faith, of conscience, of spirituality, who ministers to those with respect to a secular organization. I just heard the gentleman say that, well, we need atheist chaplains, which to me is an oxymoron. We need atheist chaplains to minister to the spiritual needs of soldiers. Well, by definition, as an atheist, he doesn't or she doesn't believe in a spiritual world. Makes no sense whatsoever. Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, the courts have affirmed that chaplains are mandated by the Constitution to enable military personnel to exercise faith according to their conscience. Non-theistic chaplains, by definition, cannot assist others in worship. For any concerns my colleague from Colorado may have as to the non-spiritual needs of servicemen and women who do not hold any sort of faith, I would submit that the military has resources readily available. Counselors, psychologists, and social workers are happy to meet those needs. I would also note that current chaplains will serve with respect to any service member, religious, non-religious, non-theistic, atheistic, or agnostic alike, who comes to them providing these brave men and women with any resources they might need in their service to the nation. So we have chaplains and secular advisors who can help anybody who claims to be or want to be an atheist. Chaplains come to the military via Department of Defense recognized faith groups, very important, faith groups. It would be impossible for an individual who does not belong to any faith group to receive an endorsement, much in the same way that atheists have long insisted that they are not, in fact, a faith group, and would thus be implausible that they would serve as a chaplain in the military. Mr. Chairman, General George Washington founded our chaplain corps on July 29, 1775, to make sure that the Continental Army could have worship services. We have 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Yield the gentleman an additional 15 seconds.
Okay.
Gentleman is recognized for 15 seconds.
Just in summary, I would like to say this, Mr. Chairman. The saddest thing I could ever imagine is someone standing over a dying man or woman from combat and saying to them, there's no hope. If you die, there's no world, there's no life thereafter. That is the saddest thing I could ever imagine. With that, I yield back.
Fired. Gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Before further yielding, I yield my fellow self 15 seconds just to say I think we're seeing a double standard here, where if it's a person of particular faiths, as perhaps the gentlemen approve of, then you say, oh, you go see a chaplain for your needs. However, if you're of no faith, you have to see a psychiatrist. All of our men and women who bravely serve us deserve the same support. With that, I yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
Only has a minute and a quarter remaining.
I yield the remaining time to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
Gentleman is recognized for a minute and a quarter.
Thank my friend for yielding. Nothing in this amendment in any way impairs the relationship between a Christian or Jewish or other soldier or service member and his or her faith leader. Nothing. Nothing in this amendment impairs the operation of the Chaplain Corps. What this amendment does is to show respect for the choices made by our service members. My Christianity is an important part of who I am and how I see my life. I don't think that that same right should be denied to a service member who does not share my beliefs. What this amendment says is that for the thousands of service members who choose a humanist or atheistic philosophy system of life, that they should be able to confide in an advisor who is not a mental health professional. Going to a mental health professional is a choice that's laden with risk and some controversy for a member of the service. Going to a faith advisor is not. Depriving those who share the views that Mr. Paulus outlined of the chance to go to such an advisor is unequal treatment. It's unworthy of the way we operate. Nothing in this amendment disrupts the Chaplain Corps, but everything in this amendment respects the rights of our service members. I would urge a yes vote and yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, how much time remaining?
The gentleman from California has 1 3/4 minutes remaining.
I yield the balance of that time to the gentleman from Kansas, my good friend Mr. Huelskamp.
The gentleman from Kansas is recognized for 1 3/4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Speaker, and I appreciate the opportunity to visit here today. And first, I'd like to visit about two heroes in the history of our country. One would be Father Emil Capon. I had the honor of being at the White House a couple months ago where he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his bravery in action, ministering to the needs of not only men and women of faith, but those who claim to have no faith. In addition, I have the honor of being the nephew of a 95-year-old Army chaplain who also has been honored for serving, ministering to the needs of men and women in uniform. One thing I will want to note that instead of being dismissive of those type of sacrifices, I'll read a little bit from the duties of the Chaplain Corps. Each chaplain shall hold appropriate religious services at least once on each Sunday. Or the Navy and Marines say an officer in the Chaplain Corps may conduct public worship according to the manner and forms of the church in which he is a member. They shall cause divine service to be performed on Sunday. And it goes on and on. Obviously, that's our understanding of the chaplaincy. But, Madam Speaker, how is it that one can hold a religious service for an organization, as the amendment puts it, that does not consider itself to be a religion? It's completely contrary to the directions, instructions, and the very definition of the Chaplain Corps, represented by Father Emil Capon and numerous others, to extend appointments to groups in manners suggested by this amendment. When you take away the worship, the prayer, everything that makes a religious service religious, you are left counselors, as have been indicated. And there are humanists, atheists, and ethical culturist counselors available to folks that serve our country. In addition, I'm certain every chaplain that serves our brave men and women are available for those who do not share their faith. And that's the case. And I urge my colleagues to vote against this amendment and be very supportive of our current brave men and women who serve alongside our members of the armed forces. And that I yield back my time, Madam Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chair.
For what purpose, the gentleman from Colorado?
On that, I request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado will be postponed. Pursuant to the order of the House of June 13, 2013, it is now in order to consider Amendment Number 20.